Welcome to the AI and Faith podcast. We are a community of expert technologists, professionals, and faith leaders bringing the ancient wisdom of the world's major religions to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Join us on this new journey and welcome to the conversation.
AI is this notion of swords and plowshares. You hear this verse quoted that they'll hammer their swords into plowshares, that this tool of warfare will become a tool of peace. I want to think about this in the context of AI and say, okay, well, these are both made of metal. It's effectively the same material, and yet they're put to different purposes because of the shape that they have. And so the shape that AI has will influence the ways that it is used. And so I want us to think about what is the shape that we have for our AI systems. And I also want to think about how the sword turns people into soldiers, whereas the plow turns people into farmers. And so what does AI turn us into as we use it?
My name is Daren Erisman, and I will be your host. Today's episode is a recorded town hall with me, Gretchen Huizinga, and Adam Graber. In the town hall, we talked from differing Christian perspectives and how recent advances in generative artificial intelligence are raising issues not only about what we're doing with AI, but what we're becoming with AI. From the use of AI-related tools like prayer apps to exploring the possibility of a righteous AI, the conversation builds, and we wonder, in this emerging age of artificial intelligence, how do we reconcile the call to be both salt and light? Listen now to our conversation. Welcome to the town hall. Adam and Gretchen and I were in a panel in Seattle for the AI and churches, that kind of a summit meeting of the mainline denominations. And actually it seemed like everyone else that was there, we had good Catholic representation and evangelical representation. And so it was neat to be in person and meet people, and that made a big difference. And so some of that conversation is going to spill over into what we're talking about. The theme here in September, October is AI and practical uses, and particularly for faith leaders. We're going to talk about some of the theological foundations and some of those pieces that are important for the church to consider. We're each going to ask each other questions. I'm going to start with Gretchen. I'm going to put her on the spot.
All right.
So your doctoral work on the concept of righteous AI. That's what you were working on. Would you briefly describe that concept and how it might help us think about the future that we share with AI?
Yeah, thanks, Daren. Let's just put a framework on this. It turns out that the three of us on this panel, we were addressing three mainline Christian denominations. And so we're all three representing various aspects of that faith. So if this feels like it's one-sided, that's the only reason. We're sort of carrying over from that conference to this one. And so our perspectives are all presented from a Christian perspective. Doctoral work, Righteous AI, came to me at the end of my doctoral research on what I'll call the Christian voice in AI ethics in response to what I was finding as default terms used by institutions and corporations. Ethical AI was the generic term, but others were also in play, like trustworthy AI, accountable, reliable. I mean, if you pull out the logical song from Supertramp in the 70s, you'll hear all the words, responsible, clinical, acceptable, practical, equitable, human-centered, inclusive, etc. So oddly, the word righteousness was never included in that. And that made sense. It has a religious connotation that a lot of people associate with self-righteousness and even judgmentalism, but that's not actually what it means if you kind of dig into the Bible. It's actually an attribute of God that brings together almost all of those adjectives and epitomizes justice, truth, and love. My purpose in doing the research was to bring, and I didn't know going in that I was going to have the word righteous feed into it. And Brian Greene has done a really beautiful article on holy technology. So there's a little bit of a nod there to him. The best and highest form of ethics is actually in the attributes of God, and that was missing from the discourse, primarily because the voices that have dominated this conversation have been secular and humanist in their worldview. So the primary concerns have been anthropological, rather than theological. So I felt like it was time to bring the word righteous out of retirement and back into the cultural zeitgeist, as it were. When people anxious about a new technology that needed to behave, needed some more context for the boundaries or the moral boundaries. So that's the term righteous AI. I want to tell you, I'm uncomfortable with the term righteous AI, not because of the word righteous, but because of the word artificial. And this is some of my thinking right now. I'll just give a hint to it, but it's more like, what kinds of intelligences are there? And artificial is mostly camped over in computational and machine intelligence. If we really want to get real about it, artificial is maybe 50, 60 years old. So I'm not going to go into that now, but I like Daren's second question. How might this idea help us frame or think about a future shared with AI? I really like how you framed that, Daren. And I'll just say, I think words matter, and the words we choose inform how we think and act. So I feel like ethical and responsible limits our imagination for goodness. It certainly behooves makers of AI to use words that would be acceptable to everyone. And I would never expect Microsoft to use righteous AI, and that's okay. But we will share a future with AI, but it's a limited future and an earthly future. So to your question, Daren, how might this help us think about a future shared with AI? I want to expand that vision to say Christians believe that our future envisions an eternal heavenly component as well, and it's shared with God. So choosing a word more closely associated with him is a good way to help us think, or to train our minds, if you will, about what our ultimate goal is. And kind of to end this quick question, one of the main questions we're swimming around with AI is, what does it mean to be human in an age of intelligent machines? And bringing the theology into it, I think, raises the bar to ask, okay, if we have a robust anthropology of what humans are, and we just start with humans, for people who believe beyond humanity that there is a creator, the bigger question is, what does it mean to be God? For Christians, the core of that answer, what it means to be human, is that we're created in the image of God. But so what if we don't really have a robust theology of who God is and what God is? And so Imago Dei leaves us with bigger questions. So that's where I'm digging right now, Daren, to close out. I don't really have a neat, tidy bow on it, but I am wanting to explore for the anthropology what the theology of being God means in the age of what I might call intelligent idols.
I'll follow up, Gretchen. I have a question just around sort of these sort of limits with righteous AI. And in your view, does this mean that, like, if people use it for righteous purposes, that your vision for like righteous AI will have been achieved? Or is that sort of the wrong way to go about it?
Well, I think it's a good question because it prompts, what are the limits of righteous AI? I would say they're the same as the limits of any other flavor of AI. It doesn't really matter what adjective we put in front of it. It's still computational intelligence that's trying to be human-like or superhuman-like. And so I don't think we can talk about the limits of AI with, completion in this town hall. But if we have to use the term AI, I prefer to use the term AI systems, because we keep reinforcing this false idea that machines possess intelligence in the same way we do. But ultimately, we're talking about human limits and our computational attempts to transcend them. I'd like to sort of anchor the answer there. And of course, we can't unpack all, but I would contend that AI is simply the latest in a long line of scary, powerful scientific discoveries like gunpowder, nuclear fusion, cloning, oat milk, things like that. So they present us with particular ethical challenges in how we make it or use it. And so from the Christian perspective, only God is righteous. And according to the Christian faith, humans can only be made righteous through faith in Christ, but we still carry the DNA of the fall and the stain of sin. So we have to fight our whole lives against that. To the answer to your second part, if people use AI for righteous purposes, you say, well, will your vision of righteous AI be achieved? I think that's funny. I don't really have a vision for righteous AI. In fact, I'm bucking against the term myself right now, kind of saying, what does that really mean? And it would be super cool if people only used AI systems for good and not for evil. But we believe that's not going to happen this side of heaven. And by we, I mean Christians. So I think a useful concept to bring to your question, Adam, and it's actually core to my vision, is this concept of alignment. And in AI circles, that means that AI systems align to human values. And you don't have to go very many clicks out to find out how problematic the idea of human values is, because it spans a large spectrum across the globe and over time, and it's changing, kind of moving. We can cherry pick a few good words that people can agree on are good things. And they're usually the ones you find on websites for OpenAI and Microsoft and Google and so on. And even religious and NGO sites would agree that these words are good, equity, fairness, safety, privacy, the things that everybody's got their brain wrapped around in this field right now. But if our starting point is aligning machines with human values, we quickly end up like Dr. Phil going, how's that working out for you? And so my vision for righteous AI is more that we're talking about computational intelligence, and it starts with a different kind of alignment. And that would be aligning fallen humans with God's transcendent values. And again, there's all kinds of arguments that you can make against that if you don't even believe in God, but I'm coming at this from a Christian perspective. That's where I would start is, my vision of AI, righteous AI, is my same vision of righteous humans, is the alignment has to start further upstream than just humans, because what a mess we've made of so many things on this planet. Daren, let's go with you. You are a professional computer science person. You are a professor and you code. And you say you came to your Christian faith later in life. And so you view the impact of AI or AI systems through a slightly different lens. What do you mean by that? And how might your perspectives add value to the conversation about AI in the church today?
So I had a really technical background in computing at an early age. Another Erisman bought me my first computer when I was like 13, and so I was immersed in that, deeply interested in the sciences. And my dad was a reference librarian at CU, University of Colorado, Boulder. So just a very scientific oriented, secular view of the world, not really anti-religious, but thinking, well, that's fine. That's an expression of the human world. And then I became a Christian and had a calling to become a pastor at the same time. And I had to figure out what it is that I believe and how does that align with, that's my own alignment problem, right? What I've known, as truth and the importance of that. Part of it, I think what I bring is maybe an understanding of some of the assumptions that maybe non-Christians are making as they work with AI that Christians are making, and the sense that I remember having a girlfriend who was a Christian and teasing her and saying, yeah, we're just all computers. We just need to be, we're all programmed, we're all doing the same patterns. We're just very sophisticated at doing that. And if you have enough knowledge about how those patterns work, enough experience, enough data, if you will, then you'll be able to mimic human behavior. And really, really viewing a person as kind of a computer in that sense, a chemical one, biological one. So there's still very much part of me that thinks that that's true, that we can, as we're thinking about AI, try to limit it, but it gets better and better. So I have sort of an optimistic view in terms of AI and what it can be and what it can do and what humans can figure out. At the same time, now as a Christian, there was this terrible thing introduced into my world, which is sin and brokenness, which science really doesn't know what to do with. It really doesn't have a good category for it. In sort of a secular view, you're kind of limited. You kind of have a bias where you see things as sort of tabula rasa, as naturally good until they're an optimistic view. And so kind of where Gretchen was scratching around is that sense that, maybe we're not improving, that there is something, transcendent that influences us and could influence AI in that way. I do like what you're saying, Gretchen, in terms of, I'm a Lutheran pastor, which means I've been trained to believe that I will not improve. That I will be saint and sinner as long as I'm around. So I would take more of a sort of a humble theology that, we aren't going to progress in that sense. And so we need to be really careful about how we program things. That brokenness is just going to eke through all the time, and that it's sort of this balance. Maybe this is a bad example, but it kind of reminds me of capitalism. What is capitalism driven from? Basic greed, right? It's based off greed, and that it's a differential, if you will, a kind of power differential that drives it. And somehow when it's successful, somehow it's contained, but it always does what? It always runs over sometimes, right? It gets too hot, it blows up, and then you have to constrain it again.
Maybe argue that starts out with a better idea and then drifts into the greed. and then we have to course correct on it. And I think what you're addressing is our visions and hopes and dreams for AI maybe start kind of high, but immediately drift into power, profit, privilege for corporations that smell trillions. Then we have to pull it back to what's good. But so, yeah.
Can I jump on? I feel like I'm already in Daren's brain space, and so I can kind of track with him a little bit. Daren, you've sort of bridging these two worlds, being a pastor and a computer scientist, and you're kind of within yourself trying to hold that tension. And I'm curious, as you speak to both sides, what's your sense of what are pastors or theologians sort of misunderstanding about artificial intelligence? And how would you sort of want to sort of correct them and lead them along the right path?
Faith leaders tend to be really curious about AI and tend to be actually users of it, even if they don't tell their congregations. What's a little confusing about AI is it's such a generic term and that there's so many different types of AI. I've been using like the logo software for helping me in my sermon preparation, spending way too much on digital books. And I've been working off, early bulletin boards on the computer, on the computer system for people sharing their sermons and share sermon examples and people tech studies. Faith leaders are always borrowing things. And so really AI is another place to borrow from. It's what I would say, and that it's another partner. And I know you all have talked about these things, but I think once a pastor really thinks about how much they've been borrowing, the pastor would say they've been stealing things, but I'll keep it nicer. Been borrowing things, and that's what pastors do. They're borrowing stories and ideas and concepts, and in a way that the generative AI is creating new opportunities for them to have engagement in things that spark their thinking. I think people think about AI as they want to limit it and say it's not going to do this, it's not going to be able to do that, it'll never be able to lead a service, it'll never be able to do a prayer, it'll never be able to. And I would say that's probably not where I would go. It's well, of course you can have those things, and of course people will get something from them. If I go to a mega church with 13 satellite places, and the sermons being piped into me from one place to another, music's playing from one place, or I'm sitting at home getting communion, or am I taking communion in the church? It gets really complicated. I want to say you can't deny what people are going to feel and experience, that those are kind of facts on the ground, and whether we want them to be true or not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think people are going to use AI and they're going to get some experience from it. Maybe it's a consolation. Maybe it's an anonymous chaplain bot that I can talk to or make confession, or offers me a word of encouragement. And if I've been talking to it enough and it's, been saving that data, there'll be a really strong personal and perhaps very a spiritual part, or at least they will feel that.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about chaplain bots and so on. I think that's one of the sort of top line uses that the church is thinking about. And that leads right into what Adam's doing, interestingly conflicted. So as a Christian believer, Adam, you've expressed concerns not only about what we're doing with AI, but what AI is doing to us and what we're becoming. So at the same time, you're personally working on applications that auto-generate prayers and auto-generate worship songs, all the way from the music to the human voice that sings it. And you're also working on a system that will evaluate theological content of sermons through generative AI. So how do you, or any of us, because I know Daren's doing computer science stuff as well, reconcile the call to be separate from the world and salt and light in a dark world with the practical realities of life in the age of what I love? Wes just sent autonomous and intelligent systems. And you're right, Wes, the ship has sailed. AI is like Kleenex, but I'd like this other one. Adam, how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah. I'll say at the top, I reserve the right to be a conscientious objector later if I change my mind. Here's how I've been thinking through it. One, I think it's easy to be a critic and it's hard to be a creator. It's really easy to say, here's my theory, we should all follow it. But to sort of take those principles, take those values, and to operationalize them is a lot harder. At the same time, the work of sort of understanding the challenges of artificial intelligence really only comes as you engage with it. And to sort of disengage, stick my head in the sand and not deal with it isn't going to make any progress from any religious point of view. And so I have this sort of posture of, okay, how can I engage with this to better understand the problems? And I feel since ChatGPT especially, been thinking and writing and speaking on this a lot more, it's, requiring that sort of engagement. And that has produced sort of insight that's necessary to kind of help lead the conversation. And then, to recognize that these AI systems are embedded in organizations and that the organizations don't change unless you are sort of changing the systems that are a part of those organizations. And that's not just, again, having sort of theory that I can throw at people, but actually showing them what that might look like. And so, when an organization came to me and said, hey, we want to create some sort of prayer bot, I was like, I don't really like that. That's my sort of sentiment, my instinctual sort of reaction. I'm trying to say, okay, how could we take this idea that I don't really like and make it better? And what would that look like? And so, I was thinking about, okay, how could we incorporate the Bible in this case for them into this bot so that it is not just like generating sort of willy-nilly content that it's trained on from the internet, but it's actually being trained on content from the Bible. And so moving that needle, showing them, hey, this would be a better approach than sort of just the bland generic one. And I think from my own faith background, one thing that I recognize is the way I see God working in the world is that he works from within, not from outside. And he chooses to redeem things from the inside, not from the outside. And so Jesus comes into the world in order to redeem the world, not kind of working from the outside in. And so recognizing how can I enter into the work of AI? How can I enter into the work of organizations to work from within and not simply be the critic from the outside criticizing? Again, I think this path is worth exploring to try and understand it better and then to try and give these organizations who are dreaming about AI maybe a better vision for what that could look like in their organizations.
That's about the best answer I ever heard for that question. Daren, do you have a question for Adam?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, speaking about what influences you from within, curious how you're working with the Bible projects you've done before this. How has that influenced the way you are developing apps or helping people understand them and this kind of technology?
Yeah, so I spent 15 years as a Bible editor. So that meant that I really was spending much of my work life in the Bible or familiar with the Bible in various ways, seeing lots of different ways that people use the Bible. So yeah, it exposed me to sort of lots of different passages of scripture. And so when I started to get interested in the technology side, I began to just see technology everywhere in scripture. And this is like beyond the sort of cliche Tower of Babel sort of theology, which I despise very strongly. Seeing it in lots of different places, seeing it in the fig leaves that Adam and Eve sew together, seeing it in the animal skins that God upgrades their clothing to be. Noah's Ark, again, sort of working from within the creation to redeem creation. In the obscure book of like 2nd John, he's talking about using pen and ink when he wants to see people face to face. And so you see all these different aspects. You see Moses creating a judicial system, a technology. The disciples in the New Testament are creating a food distribution program. Yeah, there's lots of others. One that I've been thinking about more recently with AI is this notion of swords and plowshares. You hear this verse quoted that they'll hammer their swords into plowshares, that this tool of warfare will become a tool of peace. I want to think about this in the context of AI and say, okay, well, these are both made of metal. It's effectively the same material, and yet they're put to different purposes because of the shape that they have. And so we wouldn't use a sword for plowing, and we wouldn't use a plow for warfare, but they're both using the same material. And so the shape that AI has will influence the ways that it is used. And so I want us to think about what is the shape that we have for our AI systems. And I also want to think about how the sword turns people into soldiers, whereas the plow turns people into farmers. And so what does AI turn us into as we use it? I think my familiarity and exposure to the Bible over time has really allowed me to let it sort of lead my thinking and to allow it to kind of open up, imagine different ways of thinking about technology. The holy technology kind of frame, I think, is really encouraging. The idea of righteous tech is really encouraging. What does a righteous shape of AI look like? And how does it shape us as righteous people to be more righteous in the process? Those are the sorts of questions that I am curious about. And I think my exposure to the Bible has really caused me to frame these questions in this way.
Adam, what does AI shape us to be? What does it turn us into? I mean, you very clear, swords turn us into warriors, plows turn us into farmers. What do you think?
Well, one vision is that we become transhuman or post-human, that we somehow upload our consciousness and into a AI system, and that rather than having a sort of biological embodiment, we have a silicon and steel embodiment or whatever. We are embodied in this silicon or perhaps robotic bodies in the future. I think more near term, even just questions around how does my using ChatGPT on a daily basis to help me brainstorm sort of cause my own brainstorming muscles to atrophy, but also expose me to new ideas that I had. I do think the shape of the AI systems is more ambiguous than a sword and a plow. And so I think the effects are somewhat contextual, but I do think there are some maybe patterns that we could kind of collectively discern together over time.
I heard before that most of the tools of the past, and Wes is referring to some of these useful technology or useful arts, you could tell what it was for by picking it up, or you could at least extrapolate. But if you pick up an iPhone from the future, you have no idea what it's for. It's a square chunk of metal. And I think there's a lot of that to say it's disembodied from its use for beginning. I also like the concept. I don't like this concept, but I think that it's where we're heading. Most of the things they sell us on for AI is what I will call a frictionless existence. You don't have to wait for anything. You don't have to think for anything. You don't have to work hard for things. It's like the epitome of the new and improved ad, but for cognitive abilities. And so, as spiritual beings, we have to ask, what's the value of working it out, thinking through things?
So I've been working with teaching K through 12 teachers AI and using it and just getting them into using it in their classrooms with their students at different levels, in the sense that we're all going to need to gain some sort of fluency in this. And I see the church doing the same thing. And one of the ideas that's intriguing is that you can create programming code, for instance, in a way that, a non-programmer can create programming code and do things, be able to create things they never could have done, never could have thought about. It would have taken them years of training to get there. In some ways, we're creating a play space for them with AI that has never been, that has really interesting tools and ways of thinking. So if we were to take sort of positive sense of this, what could we think spiritually if with those kinds of tools? If we have the Calvins, the Luthers, all those pieces to build upon, and multilingual. Yeah. I mean, we work within a language or two, but to work within multiple languages on the same problem, there's real possibilities. And it does sound like the Tower of Babel in a way, but I do think there are opportunities for the church. There are tools there, but they can also be misused. I realize that.
We've shaped an AI system with generative AI, at least, that's designed to give answers. And there's a flip side where it could be designed to give questions, right? Where it actually invites you to think more deeply about the thing that you're thinking about. And challenges you from different angles, and causes you to sharpen your thinking. It doesn't dull your thinking. And I think that that sort of mode and use of AI has certainly has benefits.
What you just talked about is Joseph Weizenbaum's Eliza way back decades ago.
Yeah.
And the computer simply said, well, tell me more about your mother. What do you think about that? And it's sort of like, those are the kinds of Socratic dialogue that we could be making the systems have. But right now we want answers, tell me everything so that I don't have to think about it.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Stay tuned to listen to more recordings and interviews with experts from around the world. In the meantime, follow and rate our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and share with your friends. Don't forget to follow us on our social media as well. We're on LinkedIn and X. Thank you for joining us today.